Reddit. I think that every small town has a local wandering eccentric who everyone knows and seems to have a story about. What's yours? We have a guy who gives guitar lessons in our town. He is basically a big jolly haggard looking bloke with a long straggly grey beard and long hair with about 20 beaded necklaces around his neck. At Christmas he wears battery powered fairy lights and will always be happy to play a tune on his guitar, or his various other small obscure instruments, on demand. You'll see him wandering about all the time and he really has his finger on the pulse with everything going on in the town. He's a Wiccan and also does his own app development on the side, and loves comics. You can have an in-depth discussion with him on any subjects and he'll probably know more than you do, but will always be very interested in what you have to say. He's a very cool guy who seems to have cracked the code on how to be happy all the time. Kind of envious tbh. You're a Wiccan, Harry. In my town there is a family known as the Backpack Family. I crap you not. This family walks everywhere with these huge camping style backpacks on. They dress like it's still 1976 and are just the most odd bunch. They actually used to be my neighbors and every day they would just chill inside and play violin and piano. Oh, and they also rode tandem bikes from a suburban town just outside of Boston to visit family down in Connecticut. That was me about 3 times in my life. When I am poor and or carless I get my hiking pack and use it to carry my groceries. I know I look like a freak but I actually receive a lot of compliments. Oh that's clever, I wouldn't have thought of that, might try that myself. Hey, good idea, that kind of thing. The Lockwood Pimp. I live in a pretty upscale white suburban town. Not too much crime or subterfuge to be had. Starting roughly a year and a half ago, though, a large black man began roaming the long winding road through my town at all hours of day and night. The odd part was the fact that no matter the weather, he was dressed in leopard print pants, a huge fur coat, and carried an elaborate cane. I live in the south so it gets pretty toasty, and I myself have seen him wandering between houses and my local high school in the wee hours of the morning. Nobody knows why he does it, but he's pimping. Sounds like a, supposedly, heavily built African man wearing a burqa that routinely traveled the Danish-Swedish ferry system during the 80s-90s. We had Larry the Lighthouse. He was an older man who would, for reasons unknown, dress up in a homemade cardboard lighthouse costume and ride his bike around town. I never spoke to him, nor have I met anyone who did, but he would wave at anyone who addressed him. Small west of Island town. Guy called Kevin. Local eccentric alcoholic whose lifestyle is tolerated enabled by the local community. Too many stories to mention them all. For years he walked into the local fast food restaurant every day, walked up the counter and said, "Can I have a leg of fish please?" Ha 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 ha. A friend of mine gave him a lift home one time. Said his house was basically a hovel with an outdoor style tap and no furniture. He's a bachelor, obviously. My father once overheard a conversation he had some old guys at a bar. Old man 1. It's 4 years now since my Mary, his wife, is passed away. Old man 2. God. Is it that long? My bridie is gone 8 years. The Lord have mercy on her. Kevin, it's 10 years now since I sold the livestock. Also small West Irish town. We don't have a Kevin but we have multiple Pats and even a Padraig. There's a guy who is affectionately known as Sticks. He's an older gent. He could easily be 90 plus, with a pair of walking sticks. He's always on the go, marching around at any time of day or night. He's not homeless. He just seems to love being out and about, even when it's freezing cold, snowing or raining. When you have Parkinson's disease but still have physical strength. Clarksville, TN. There's a 6 feet 4 inches, incredibly buff man of African descent named Kenny who walks around the city yelling at parked cars and having boxing matches with them, almost as if the car said something derogatory towards him. Found him the other day on the south side of town attempting to flip a Corolla. Roommate thought it would be a great idea to talk to him. Turns out, he's actually pretty funny. He just so happens to also be crazy. You will find him in different parts of town every day, continuing his solemn duty of protecting the Allspark from Decepticons. This last bit made the whole thing a treat. We have a guy who walks around downtown in various, Well made, I should say. Superhero costumes depending on the day. Some days you'll see him riding his bike in a head-to-toe Thor costume, hammer and all. Other days he's dressed as the Flash, just sprinting everywhere. Sometimes I see a Batman running around climbing stuff. It's pretty funny and everyone seems to know who you're talking about when you mention him. That's fabulous. At our local shopping center there is a morbidly obese alcoholic woman on a mobility scooter that rides around the shopping center asking people to buy alcohol for her, using several different excuses as to why she can't buy it herself. Truth is, she is banned from every single bottle shop because of her behavior towards staff. She will abuse people who refuse to buy her alcohol. She will go so far as crying or falling off her scooter for attention, making people feel sorry for her and willing to help her by buying her what she wants. It's actually really sad. People fall for it so often. No one really knows what to do. Take off on the mobility scooter while she's on the ground. The guy in my hometown looked like a hobo, but if you were paying attention you'd notice something was up. Like his fingernails were never dirty. His clothes were a mess and tattered, but he didn't smell. When I was a teenager I took a weekend job and the store manager knew the guy's social worker. Basically the dude was super rich. He'd married into money. She divorced him. He'd taken half and then had a mental breakdown. I saw him eat a burger out of a trash can and then 10 minutes later walk past again with brand new shoes. My manager told me he wears out his shoes and literally walks into the nearest sporting goods store, asks for the most expensive shoes, pays for them, puts them on and walks out. He's an actual millionaire who wanders around like a homeless guy. Reading this thread I realize that's not as rare as I thought. This is a dream. Now, just gotta find that money. Old Gertie who would wander about the town ranting and raving. She took the opportunity during 1 minute's silence on Anzac Day one year to inform the gathered masses at the top of her voice she had an uncle in the war. Pausing for dramatic effect, and clearly savoring the attention she had acquired, she shortly continued, "He was blown to smithereens." That's a beautiful story. Santa Claus man drives his bike around with a Santa hat on in a subtropical climate. It is so dirty the white edging is varying shades of grey. Oh man, we have a Santa man too. His name is Xanta. This ripped bearded dude goes shirtless and randomly does push-ups in conspicuous places while wearing his Santa hat. Or at least that's how it was 10 years ago. Now he just shouts abuse at women on the subway. In my town there is a guy called Dave and he walks everywhere with a book. He literally walks hours every day, has a coffee at the shopping center and he's off again all the while reading. Our local paper did a story in him once and at that point he had read 1,200 books. All this after a serious car crash where his was told he would most likely be a vegetable. Anyway, I would take my daughter and our friend's son to the library every week and sometimes after we'd have a treat at the cafe. This particular day Dave had seen us there and commented at how well behaved the kids were at the library and shouted them a sweet each. I'd never really spoken to him before, just a hello here and there, but I'll never forget his kindness and encouragement for getting the kids into reading. The local character in our town, Winston, name changed for privacy, is infamous for his tendency to gatecrash funerals and wakes in order to steal food. It sounds a bit mad, but most people accept the inevitability of him coming along and are surprisingly tolerant of him, despite him being pretty rude and usually insensitive to people grieving. Usually someone will fill a plate of food for him and he's content to eat and leave. He can also be spotted most days in his famous jogging bottoms ratty blazer beanie hat combination, and he tends to hitchhike a lot between the nearby towns in order to hoke through bins and scavenge food. He's far from homeless or starving though. Rumor is he's actually secretly rich and he has his own cottage on the edge of town. Recently he's been given a spot in the local newspaper called Winston's Corner, which usually consists of him ranting about potholes or making nonsensical conspiracy theories up about the local council. He's a strange fellow. I'd watch this movie. In Muncie, Indiana there is a living urban legend with the most awesome name you've ever heard. Sea Wolf. He is a real man, named Jim Wolf, in his 60s or 70s that has roamed the streets of Muncie for decades. Back in his prime he could have been seen riding his bike around the park and the junior high school wearing his unique wardrobe. That often consisted of a top hat, a cape, and the ever-present slave dog collar. The story goes this man liked to approach young boys and offer them sea in exchange for friendship. He was once spotted at a high school basketball game with a young teenager holding a leash attached to his collar. Some people think he's homeless. Some people think he's a sexual predator. He's really just a weird dude that was turned into a social outcast for living as an out gay man in a small Indiana town in the 1970s. He has earned legendary status with his catchphrase "Sea Wolf, at your service." Some people think he is a fictional boogeyman of sorts, but I have seen him with my own eyes. When I read Muncie, Indiana, I fully expected this to be a story about Jerry Jurgic. Reading, England. Reading Elvis. Without fail, this guy will be in the town center every day, wearing an Elvis shirt and carrying an Elvis record with the biggest smile on his face you've ever seen. The city I studied in years ago had Bag Man, a homeless gentleman that had a massive collection of bags, mainly shopping bags, just stuffed full of other bags. He'd seemingly spend all day just moving them around. Either you were unfortunate enough to study Brisbane, or there is an international army of bagmen. My hometown had a guy with a real intense case of Tourette syndrome. He would just ride his bike around throwing cans at stray dogs and cursing at people. My grandpa always said hi and asked how he was doing. "Oh hi, John. Frick off. Beautiful day today, eh?" Having a guy like that around was actually a pretty important learning resource for my young self as far as understanding the uniqueness of individuals. Grandpa explained that he's a person just like me and deserves the same decency and respect. Although now I live in the South and I get real skeptical of how nice people are. Burping Ron. Used to go around town with a buggy that could have anything in it, often cabbages, hooting down drains and talking to skips. Everyone was really fond of him. He'd often give people presents he had found in the street and wrapped in newspaper. Sadly he died in 2006. They found an unexploded World War II bomb in his back garden and an oil painting of him signed by a pretty famous artist, who was killed by a bear. Town doesn't feel the same without him. My cabbages. The pedestrian mall downtown has a guy that walks up and down the length of the mall for hours at a time, loudly singing hymns. He's got a really great voice and is kind and pleasant to talk to. He just loves his hymns. We have a millionaire horse breeder who drives around town in a beat up old pickup with a smelly coonhound hanging out of the window. He spends most of his days getting drunk and playing slots at gas stations near his farm. My hometown has Mike on a bike. His name is Mike, and he rides his bike everywhere, all over town, all year, even during the Canadian winters. He'll wander into the grocery store, or the mall, or at whatever local event happens to be going on, and just wander around and say hello to everyone, smiling and waving, and everyone just smiles and waves back. Everyone knows Mike. One day, someone stole Mike on a bike's bike. It made the local paper, and if I recall, dozens of people donated to help Mike get a new bike, with all the bells and whistles, and so Mike got a new bike, to bike another day. Came to this thread looking for Mike on a bike. There is a clinically retarded man in my hometown who spends all day riding around on his bicycle, carrying a large model of one of the bridges. This guy is obsessed with bridges, all day, on his bike, riding around to different bridges. He always has a huge grin on his face, though, so I guess he's happy. I got another one. You thought I was done? Nope. The other is a guy who stands at a bus stop all day, ironically the one that is outside of what used to be a mental asylum, and waves to passing cars. That's it. He just waves. We have a guy who walks around the local shopping center starting arguments with anyone who looks at him wrong. Note that this is in England, where everyone minds their own business and avoids talking to strangers unless needed in most cases. The most memorable story I have is where he tried to start an argument with two old, 80+ ladies, calling them W and slappers. I believe he is harmless, just mentally ill. He's also banned from the shopping center now, most likely after the above mentioned incident. Finally, I can talk about this guy. In Tucson, AZ there was this guy that drives a truck for a local sandwich chain called EG's. He dresses up like Blade from the movie Blade, like head to freaking toe, and he even goes by the name Blade. Tucson has a lot of eccentric weirdos, but this guy is first on the list, I think. I've ran into oodles of people that know of Blade. Also, when I was working at Target, I sold him baby oil once, and he used a coupon. Don't forget Chicago. He's the guy with a hood made of can tabs and wears a leopard cod piece over his leather pants. He's my favorite panhandler down there, followed by the guy who plays the flute while he bicycles and the guy with the CCTV of passers-by embedded in his junk cart. Tucson has some crazy street people. That would be my father. He sits on the corner in town and waves to everyone and makes small talk with both adults and kids. My mom died 8 years ago and he is lonely, so he became the town weirdo to not be lonely. So not a weirdo. I'd happily join him if we were close. Dude looks homeless, but the rumor is that he's absolutely loaded. He goes about with his dog plodding behind, wandering around seemingly aimlessly. We have an old guy in the community who walks around bouncing his tennis ball. He does it religiously at least several times a day, mostly around the time there's little people around, like 5 AM or so. I've never seen him talking to anyone on his promenades. My neighbor told me this guy was an alcoholic and heavy smoker literally for decades, until one day he got a serious stroke that left him with severe motion impairments. The rumors add it was a breaking point. He quit smoking and drinking and started exercising religiously. This tennis ball was initially his main tool to regain coordination, but he kind of get used to it, if at least a part of the story about the impact of stroke on his motion coordination is true. The guy did a great job recovering. He looks very fit and physically healthy at this point. This way one can say that whatever happens happens for the best, even about his stroke. We have a couple people, but the ones that stand out most are these. 1. Bike man. He liked to ride around a certain section of street downtown on his bike and scream obscenities at people in cars, like "I'll murder you like you murdered the environment," and other extreme declarations of his devotion to the environment. I admire him, but he purposefully rides in front of cars. It's a miracle he hasn't been hit. Haven't seen Bike Man in a while though. I believe the police arrested him for obstructing traffic or some other minor thing so they could get him treatment, as he was clearly mentally ill. 2. The Walking Red. This guy lived on my street growing up, at the other end. He would walk very slowly like a zombie, and he had red hair, hence the name, and talked to himself all around the neighborhood, completely oblivious to anyone else. Thankfully he has gotten treatment and is now fine. I think he lives in a group home at the other end of my street. 3. Crazy Mary. This one's a little sad. She used to always walk around our neighborhood with a shopping cart having delusions and yelling. She later received treatment and is now perfectly fine. But she had no idea what she was doing before she had treatment. But it didn't stop the pizzeria from having a pizza called the Crazy Mary. These are the people we knew from my neighborhood. There are several other characters downtown. Thankfully, my city does its best to treat the mentally ill, and we have fairly good resources for the homeless. So fortunately most people like those I've mentioned have been brought to shelters, or group homes, or received treatment. Town of under 1,000 people. Local townie is referred to as the lawn wizard. He rides around all spring summer on his lawnmower just mowing people's lawns. He works hard for his money, gotta give him that. He's a pretty ungroomed man who rolls his own cigarettes and seems to live off of Oreos that he has stashed in his mower's trailer. In town we have a guy who runs a communist farm and is all about the lifestyle. He frequents a coffee shop where he will debate the merits of communism with anybody who will listen. The funny thing is that he comes from a very well-off family and has never traveled anywhere except Canada and Western Europe. We, small town in rural southern USA, have a little old man named Homer. He's in his late 80s, and he goes for a run. Well, more like a shuttle really, every single morning on the bike path next to the main road. Then he goes down to the ocean and swims a mile. He also sits near one of the ponds and feeds the turtles. They all gather around him and he talks to them. He's like their king or something. One time he told me all of their names and he has like backstories for them and everything. Even the snapper. We call him Homer the Turtle Man. Reading these stories makes me sad because I live in the Bay Area, which is more or less a giant open-air mental asylum. Crazy people from everywhere collect here because the programs are supposedly good. You could take all the people mentioned on this thread, multiply them by 2,000 and still not cover all the insanity in downtown San Francisco. I only wish that the majority was half as benign as these folks with their guitars and Santa hats. We have the bikini lady. She's a pretty older lady, maybe in her 70s, who always goes for walks around our town in shorts and bikini tops when the weather gets nice out. Most people around here are genuinely interested in her well-being. If people don't spot her, they always make sure she's okay and taken care of. About 25 years ago I lived near Brixton in London, and there was a local African eccentric preacher type guy who used to carry a large crystal on a string and would stop pregnant women and solemnly dangle the crystal in front of their bump. Watch it twirl for a few seconds and then say it will be a boy. You must call it Michael and then stride off. Every time. It was never a girl. I've often wondered how many people who went on to have a boy actually called their baby Michael. The stuffed animal man. He first appeared when my mom was a kid in the 70s 80s. He was still around for me and my brother in the 90s early 2000s. He rides around on this large tricycle that has a basket on the back. It is absolutely covered in plush toys of all shapes and sizes. When my mom was a kid he used to give them out along with cartoon doodles. When she was 12 she got a nice Kermit the Frog drawing from him. By the time I came around he just rode his trike through the neighborhood still mounted with his plush menagerie occasionally waving. I spent a lot of time watching him because I admired his collection so much. I would sit on my bike drinking slushies while he just rode on by. No one I know has ever been afraid of the stuffed animal man either. He was just a part of the knob, just like the junk cars and feral cats. Every time I go back to visit I always hope to see him. But even if he was alive he'd be too old to make his rounds. To be honest though, it was always on the same street, by the same market that I saw him. So maybe by that point he was a ghost. I used to see this guy around town. He rode this great big bike, like straight out of Wizard of Oz, and always had a huge smile on his face. When I got a job at a retail chain, he would come in the store occasionally and walk around. He would always tell people emphatically how beautiful our store was. Real pleasant guy. Never bought anything, just told us how beautiful everything was. I hadn't seen him for a year or so, and then saw an article about him in the paper. He had been some kind of nuclear scientist, held several patents and whatnot, then developed some mental issue. I don't remember what it was, and had to quit his job. The article about him was written because he died. Slow-mo in Pacific Beach, San Diego. He rollerblades down the boardwalk in slow motion all the time. Super nice guy, will slow motion wave at you. I think I saw this guy on the show The Moaning of Life. There's a brother and sister in my town whose names are Everard Dong and Ophelia Dong, cause their parents were massive trolls. Nothing actually interesting about them, but they're still local celebrities cause of their names. I think Everard's been in the news a few times though. We used to have a cross-dressing man called Lawrence who walked around the town every day. He would swear he was the cousin of Wayne Bridge, the football player. Unfortunately he was bullied by a lot of the town because they all see and never got the mental help he needed and died. Everyone will always remember him though. Almost forgot about the man that goes around stopping people in the street and tells them jokes. He's a nice bloke. Me. In my city, there's a brightly dressed trans woman that rollerblades back and forth on the crosswalk of a heavily used intersection. She likes to direct pedestrian traffic. We had a guy who we called the Chicken Man. He was always running around town really fast with his elbows stretched out like a chicken. Guy could cover ground like nobody else. Haven't seen him in years. I think he passed away. Veggie Vic. Dude lived in the creek. Story goes he was actually a brilliant chemist who tried making his own M recipe. Didn't go so well and ended up frying his brain. Last saw him about 10 years ago, heading south on Yonge St towards Trona. Notable mention of Donny Bun. Would steal people's bikes and then go door to door trying to sell it. Can't remember what happened to him. Possibly got beaten up after trying to sell my friend's older brother's bike back to him. Might still be around for all I know. My town is pretty small but lots of forest for them to hide in. There's also a halfway house for men that hopefully he's at now. Veggie Vic was walking away from it, maybe running away. I am from upstate NY. In my town, there is a large, bearded man who feeds the squirrels in our parks. I have seen him a few times in my life. One time, my friend and I were in middle school. We came across this guy because we had to go through the park to get home. My friend asked him why he was feeding the squirrels peanuts. The man's response was that someone has to feed the squirrels. Another time I was behind him in line at the grocery. His cart was full of canned peanuts. The second to last time I saw him, I was with my dad. My dad was a social worker at the time, since retired, and he greeted Squirrel Man by name. Squirrel Man's name is Mike. Everyone has a name. Everyone deserves respect. And since then, I have called Squirrel Man by his name. I was home for the holidays or a weekend or something recently and I saw him walking down the street. Still large, still bearded, hair mostly grey now. I hope he was going to feed some squirrels. Thanks, Mike. RTG. Homeless drunk who played the guitar always had his dog with him. He's dead and gone now, but he'd suck your dong for 50p. There's a man on our block, call him Sam, who had a series of brain surgeries when he was young. He's about late 30s now with learning disabilities and some other cognitive issues. He lives with his aging mom. Every day Sam puts on his backpack, containing who knows what, and walks down to the town grocery pharmacy to buy a Sprite with probably his daily Sprite allowance. On his way he knocks on neighbors' doors asking for a Sprite. Sometimes he rolls a cart around with which to collect his Sprites. He gets upset if you don't have Sprites, so he'll ask for a beer. One time we gave him a beer. His mom got mad at us. Strange and wonderful lives. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.